Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The campaign group LeaveEU has been fined £70,000 after an investigation into funding during the 2016 referendum campaign. The Electoral Commission concluded the campaign group incorrectly reported what it spent, and it's referred its chief executive, LeaveEU, to the police. The group's founder, Aaron Banks, has accused the Commission of a politically motivated attack on Brexit.
Now, the Brexit campaign group LeaveEU has been fined £70,000 for breaching election law during the 2016 EU referendum. The Electoral Commission said the group failed to report at least £77,000 in its spending returns, taking it 10% over the limit. It's also referred the group's chief executive to the police, saying it had reasonable grounds to suspect criminal offences. The investigation did not find any evidence the group paid for services from Cambridge Analytica during the campaign period. Here's our political correspondent, Michael Craig.
LeaveEU, linked to UKIP and Nigel Farage, weren't the official pro-Brexit referendum campaign, but still major players, as one of scores of groups allowed to spend up to £700,000 each. Today, the Electoral Commission found they overspent by at least £70,000, 10% above the cap, and fined them the same sum for that and 3 other offences.
What we found is that they failed to accurately report where their money came from, how they spent that money, both in terms of including what they spent in their spending return and the accuracy of that, and the missing invoices from that spending return. And I think probably most significantly, they've exceeded the spending limit that was set by Parliament.
We've got 60 people in our call centre.
The chief executive of LeaveEU, LeaveEU, has been referred to the police for possible breaches of election law. But LeaveEU founder and donor Aaron Banks says the Commission report was politically motivated.
I think it's 100% politically motivated. I mean, it's very easy to say, well, they fine the Conservatives, the Liberals, the Labour. They pretty much fine anyone they investigate. You know, but in this particular case, the composition of the Electoral Commission is overwhelmingly Remain.
But the Electoral Commission said again today they feel constrained. They can only fine groups and parties £20,000 for each offence. Not much of a deterrent, they feel, amidst a fraught political contest.
That can really be seen as a cost of doing business by very well-established and well-funded campaigns. So we would like to see that increase.
And disputes over whether people in recent elections and referendums broke spending rules suggest election law was designed for a past age and hasn't kept up to date.
The difficulty with any piece of regulation is, of course, the world doesn't stand still. Now, in terms of election campaigns, we've seen the development of online and social media campaigning, which simply wasn't around when this legislation was drafted. Equally, if you put a maximum value on fines, unless that's adjusted for inflation or cost of living, then the value of that fine becomes lower and lower and lower. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here.
Since the referendum, the Electoral Commission has fined several groups, both Remain and Brexit, for irregularities. The Liberal Democrats, for instance, were fined £18,000 for submitting an inaccurate return, and the Commission are still investigating whether Vote Leave overspent by hundreds of thousands of pounds. But for those who argue that the referendum was only clinched in the end by overspending by Brexit groups, it's worth bearing in mind that on the official figures at least, Remain groups and parties spent almost £6 million more than those on the Brexit side.
And Michael joins us now from Westminster, and that's not the only headline that Aaron Banks and Nigel Farage have been making today.
No, both Mr Banks and Mr Farage are tonight in Northern Ireland, where they're attending a dinner given by the Democratic Unionist Party, amid speculation that both men are about to join the DUP. Now, they haven't fully quashed that speculation in talking to me and to others. They're probably teasing in their normal way, but it does raise intriguing possibilities at a time when the DUP, of course, hold the balance of power at Westminster and the government are dependent on them to continue in office. Would Mr Banks give some of his large fortune to the DUP? More important, would a DUP MP perhaps be persuaded to stand down in favour of Nigel Farage taking over his seat? Now, this probably won't happen, but were it to happen, then I can't help feeling that the possibility of Nigel Farage as an MP would send some shivers of terror through some spines in Downing Street.
Thanks, Michael.
Let's bring you some of the day's other main news now. The Brexit campaign group LeaveEU is facing fines of £70,000 after overspending in their campaign. The co-founder Aaron Banks said it was a politically motivated attack on Brexit. The EU Commission said transparency was key to a campaign and failure to report overspending unacceptable.
They failed to accurately report where their money came from. They've got it wrong in terms of how they've reported how that money was spent, including missing some spending and missing invoices for others. And perhaps most significantly, they've then gone on to breach the spending limit that Parliament set for the referendum. Parliament sets these rules because transparency and public confidence in the way that campaigns are run is really important. And these rules are clear and they exist to make sure that we know where money comes from, that the public can see how that money is spent, that we know who's the recipients of that and when it's spent.
They found an alleged overspend of £7,000 on 700,000 and 12 million. And it's, you know, it's a bit like the Al Capone thing. They had to try to get us on something, so they found whatever they could. It's a bit, you know, akin to firing an arrow into the wall and then painting the target around the arrow.
One of the leading Brexit campaigns has been handed a record fine and its chief executive referred to police over breaching spending limits. The £70,000 fine was the biggest the Electoral Commission could impose. Aaron Banks, the UKIP backer who helped bankroll the campaign, is not known for mincing his words. No surprise then that he described it as a politically motivated attack on Brexit and those who voted for it.
A more prosperous and safer future awaits us outside the EU.
Adverts bankrolled by Leave supporters. Now it seems the LeaveEU message came at an excessive cost. They won a narrow victory. But today the Election Commission concluded LeaveEU had broken the rules.
I think it is really important that campaigners abide by those rules so that people can see where money has come from. Those spending returns we publish quite quickly after they come to us so anyone can see them. I think it's important that those are right.
LeaveEU has been fined a record equalling £70,000 for failing to declare more than £77,000 it spent on the referendum campaign. But the Electoral Commission has investigated more than 30 offences by other parties and campaign groups who breached campaign rules, including the Liberal Democrats fined £18,000. Multi-millionaire backer and campaigner Aaron Banks called it a political witch hunt.
I think it's 100% politically motivated. You know, but in this particular case, the composition of the Electoral Commission is overwhelmingly Remain.
Chief Executive Liz Bilby is facing a police investigation and possible charges. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed that they have received a complaint and it's been handed to their Special Investigations Unit, which looks at allegations against MPs and other high-profile individuals. They must decide if any criminal offence has been committed. The group has denied it did anything wrong and says it will be appealing today's findings. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
Talking of Leave, LeaveEU was, you might remember, one of the Brexit-supporting campaign groups during the EU referendum. And today it's been fined £70,000 for breaches of election law. Our correspondent, Eleanor Garnier, can tell us more. Eleanor, what was it for?
Well, you'll remember that LeaveEU wasn't the official Brexit campaign group, but it was still allowed to spend £700,000 in the referendum campaign in 2016. It's the group that's associated with Nigel Farage, the former UKIP leader, and Aaron Banks, so neither of them are singled out as having done anything wrong. What the Electoral Commission has found is that it overspent its limit by at least 10%. That's why it's been fined £70,000. But it also found it gave incomplete and inaccurate information about 3 loans, that it failed to provide invoices and receipts for payments totalling £80,000. And it also, when it came to services from a US campaign group called Goddard Gunster, those were not included in its spending return. So the chief exec of LeaveEU has been referred to the police, with the Electoral Commission saying it had reasonable grounds to believe she knowingly or recklessly filed incorrect information on the campaign's spending. We should note, Joe, as well, that the Commission found no evidence that the tech firm Cambridge Analytica had made donations or provided paid-for services, and that its work was limited to sort of a scoping work only. And remember, Cambridge Analytica has just announced it's closing down.
Right, I mean, Eleanor, LeaveEU isn't the only organisation or group to be fined, is it?
That's right. This is a record equalling fine. It's a big fine, £70,000. But as you say, it's not the only group to have been fined. UKIP was also fined for the financial campaign, or the finances around its campaign in the referendum. So too the Liberal Democrats, of course, a pro-EU party. Another pro-EU group called European Movement was also fined. And there is a separate investigation going on into the official group, Vote Leave. That investigation is still going on.
Eleanor Garnier, thank you very much. Well, in a moment, we hope to be speaking to the co-founder of LeaveEU. As I said, he's Aaron Banks. But before we go to him, to you two, first of all, what do you make of this fine, record fine?
Oh, well, it's the cost of doing business. It's 70 grand from a campaign that spent millions. It's essentially over the paperwork that was filed and the timing of the payments, and the interesting thing is whether or not a criminal charge comes of this. What we are seeing is Electoral Commission having some teeth. It's been previously very reluctant to investigate, let alone fine people substantially, and it's coming under pressure to do that. But I think the real one that's going to be very interesting, and I'll be interested to hear your views on it, having worked on the campaign, is what happens to Vote Leave and their separate investigation, which is yet to conclude.
Right, we'll come to you about that in just a moment, because Aaron Banks is now there in Belfast for us. Aaron Banks, it's the price of doing business. What do you say?
Well, I completely disagree. You know, we've said we're not happy with what the Electoral Commission have said today, and we will be challenging it in court.
Why aren't you happy? I mean, they seem to have fairly clear reasons for fining you that amount. You broke the rules.
Well, that's not, in our opinion, that's not true. It's a disputed amount of 70,000 that led to a £7 grand overspend on the campaign. That was an internal management charge, which our lawyers have told us wasn't reportable. So we have absolutely made clear that we responded to them with a... I mean, the interesting thing about it is that they issued their draft report after 400 days, asked for our feedback, which we gave, 20 pages of response, an independent accountant's report, which they took 3 days to consider. Now, in the opinion of our lawyers, there's no way they could have done that. So effectively what they've done is they started off their investigation with a remit of investigating Cambridge Analytica and dark Russian money. They found no evidence of any of those things, and they've kind of fined us on a technical accounting issue which is heavily in dispute.
Right, but you do believe that spending rules should be applied, and
Absolutely.
you support and believe in the law?
Absolutely.
Right.
But we disagree with the facts that they put forward. We say that this is not reportable expenditure. And as I say, we set a 20-page report back, along with an independent accountant's opinion of various levels of spend, and they've chosen to ignore that completely and just take the word draft off their report.
Right.
So we'll see them in court, and we'll let a judge decide who's right and who's wrong.
Right. You've said that you think it's politically motivated. Why?
Well, of course it is. I mean, the chairman of the Electoral Commission actually said in public comments that the Brexit campaign was a collection of Eurosceptic nonsense. That's from the man himself. There's been other comments from other Commission members. One said that Blair was right, we need a second referendum. Another one said that the young should ignore the result of the referendum. I mean, it's a politically motivated body.
Was it politically motivated when they fined the Liberal Democrats, the pro-EU party? They were fined £18,000 for breaking spending rules
I don't know what the Liberal Democrats did or didn't do. I know what we did,
right,
which is we filed our report correctly. We responded to their allegations with a 20-page report and an independent accountant's opinion, by the way, and they chose in 3 days just to ignore that and go ahead with their fine.
But I don't quite see, I mean, if you're saying they're politically motivated, it's clear that they have fined other organisations that in your view... Well, hang on, let me just finish. So the Liberal Democrats have been fined. So was a European movement UK spending return, also incomplete and inaccurate, and also UKIP. So are you saying that they are a corrupt organisation?
Well, I'm saying that they're politically motivated in the same way the House of Lords is. I mean, these are people, you know, if you look up, if you thought about this rationally, the body that oversees politics should be apolitical. The board of
they say they are apolitical.
Well, yes, but the board of the Electoral Commission is made up of former MPs, ex-Liberal MPs, ex-SNP, former Labour leader councils. It's anything but. And we know that it's a political, you know, it acts in a political way.
Or it's just sour grapes on your part because you actually broke the spending rules, you overspent and you've been fined accordingly.
Well, I've just gave you our explanation. It was to do with a internal management charge, which we do not believe is reportable.
Right, but I mean, how do you explain that other parties, pro-EU parties, have also been fined?
Well, that's not for me to explain, is it? I'm telling you what I think is a justification for today's opinion.
Right.
And I think it follows on, you know, a sustained campaign against Brexit.
Chloe, what do you say, listening to Aaron Banks? Do you think that the Electoral Commission is politically motivated in the way he's just outlined?
No, I don't think so. I think they've probably based their decision on evidence, and they have investigated Vote Leave twice and found there was no wrongdoing. There's another investigation pending now, so we'll see what happens. But I just think it's really rich, actually. Some Remain campaign is now preaching to Leavers about how there was some kind of unfair advantage. If you want to talk about an unfair advantage, let's talk about that £9 million leaflet, the OECD, the big banks, all of the political elite powering behind the Remain campaign. I mean, the idea that Leave had an unfair advantage is a bit nonsensical.
And what do you say to the Remain line that actually organisations like Aaron Banks basically cheated to get the result?
Well, I must admit, having dealt with Aaron a lot during the referendum and his campaign, I think that LeaveEU sometimes was one of the most catastrophically chaotic campaigns I've ever dealt with at all. But what I'm interested and would like to ask Aaron is much more about whether he'll finally give a full declaration of where the money that he put in, the millions of pounds that he put into the campaign, came from.
Right, Aaron?
Yeah, it came from me. It came from Peter Hargreaves that donated £3.3 million to send 10 million letters out, and it came in from public donations, all of which we've disclosed. By the way, for Jim Waterstone, I mean, obviously The Guardian have purveyed fake news on this story right from the very beginning. But if we look at the genesis of where this investigation started, it started with Ben Bradshaw using parliamentary privilege to claim that we had used Cambridge Analytica and been involved in Russian dark money. Today's report from the Electoral Commission says it has no evidence of that and actually has fined us on a technical accounting query.
Right.
I think people like Jim are a bit sad and bitter about it because they lost the referendum. They clearly thought that we were, you know, incompetent or, you know, whatever other words he uses. But actually what we did was motivate millions of working class Labour people to go out and vote for Brexit.
But Jim, are you sad and bitter?
Absolutely not. I mean, I was covering the campaign as an independent journalist.
Oh, yeah, right.
Standing on the Nigel Farage flotilla alongside Aaron as he looked on the Palace of Westminster.
You're about as unbiased as Carol Cadwallader and the rest of the Guardian idiots.
Well, I'm delighted to have such a strong endorsement of my new publication from a man such as yourself, Aaron. But look, this is, I think the interesting thing as well is that this is still playing out 2 years on, and no matter what happens, I don't think there's any chance really now of this affecting or in any way impacting the outcome, which is going to be Britain leaving the EU.
I mean, Jim, wouldn't you agree that even if it was correct, and we dispute it, that a £7,000 overspend on £12 million of campaign finance is a drop in the ocean? We dispute it and we say it's incorrect, but even if it was true, it would be a tiny amount of money.
And with that in mind, I do think the interesting thing is what happens to Vote Leave, who have allegedly overspent by a substantially more money, according to the investigation that is currently winding its way through the Electoral Commission.
I think, you know, I've opinion of Vote Leave, which is probably not a great deal better than yours.
Right. I mean, Chloe, what do you want to say? You voted, you work for Vote Leave. Chloe, what do you say?
Well, you know, as I said, it's an ongoing investigation. Vote Leave have been cleared twice. I think, I think there is a real, it smacks of desperation a little bit from people who don't want Brexit to happen. And, you know, they've lost the argument on the single market and the customs union, kind of clutching at straws at any way to belittle the result. But you're right, Jim. There's no way that we're going to stop Brexit now. It's happening. I think, you know, we should just get on with it and wait for the investigation.
Vote Leave gave more than £500,000 in the final days of the referendum campaign to a 23-year-old fashion student who was working often in the Vote Leave office. I mean, that is a somewhat unusual arrangement.
Well, it was cleared by the Electoral Commission, and there's new evidence that's come forward, and on this show we saw there was no smoking gun, as you found out. Well, so we'll see what happens.
Aaron, I just wanted to ask you because
I was just going to say to Jim Waterstone, the Electoral Commission okayed a £9 million spend from the government, who was a non-participant in this, to send a leaflet to everyone in the country.
Right.
They rode roughshod over every rule.
Can I just ask, because Chloe mentioned, you know, Brexit is going to happen.
Yeah.
Why do you think the DUP are the great defenders at the moment of Brexit?
Well, I think that they believe in the Brexit principles. I mean, people call it hard Brexit or otherwise, but, you know, our view is that leaving the European Union is leaving the customs union and leaving the single market, and I do think they will hold the government to account.
Right, you don't think they're more interested in protecting the union than they are pursuing the kind of Brexit that you'd like to see?
I think they're interested in many things, but, you know, clearly the government rely on them for their majority, and, you know, they're an important voice.
All right, Aaron Banks, thank you
very much. Pleasure.
It's